Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 142, Behind the Scenes. There were two other groups of people that belonged to Gunlaug. The first of them consisted of sleepers with useful utility abilities and their helpers. These people, known as artisans, played a very important role in the life of the castle. They were responsible for creating and maintaining various items that were either vital to survival or made existing on the Forgotten Shore less unbearable, such as clothes, tools, equipment, utensils, and various gear. Each artisan had a small team of less gifted sleepers helping them craft the necessary items. All in all, there were around 100 of them in total, with most of that number consisting of the assistants. They were led by a young woman called Keto, who was a talented manager and had an ability that allowed her to change attributes of certain plants. The vegetables in Sunny's stew came from her garden. Since such an ability was nothing short of priceless on the Forgotten Shore, where food was scarce and mostly homogeneous, it wasn't surprising that she had become one of the lieutenants despite being much younger than the rest of them. The status of artisans was somewhat of a tense subject in the Bright Castle. Because they were largely non-combatants, guards felt that their position should be inferior to that of people actually risking their lives in vicious battles against nightmare creatures. Artisans, on the contrary, believed that the rarity of utility aspects and the vital role they played in maintaining the living conditions inside the castle should land them more prestige than the castle guard, which basically recruited any random nobody, enjoyed. This conflict had been simmering for a long time, and was not going to be resolved anytime soon. Funnily enough, hunters, who risked their lives the most, did not care about the issue one way or another. Their leader Gemma, however, was silently supporting the artisans and their chief, Keto, which prevented the guards from being too forceful in their argument. The last group of people who belonged to Gunlaug was the handmaidens. These were the young women Sunny had seen quietly performing various chores around the castle, like making sure that windows were properly closed before the onset of the night or preparing and handing out food during mealtime. They were responsible for maintaining the castle itself, as well as serving the high-ranking members of the host. There were also around 100 of them. From what Sunny knew about the world, these poor girls should have been the prime victims of abuse within the walls of the ancient stronghold, but to his surprise, they were actually strangely revered, and even a little feared. The main reason for this was their leader, a mysterious and strikingly beautiful woman known as Saishan. Saishan not only took care of her handmaidens, but also secretly taught them how to defend themselves. The exact extent of their training was unknown, but Sunny clearly saw that members of the castle guard were very careful to behave themselves around handmaidens. Most of the time. The other reason was that, like everything else in the castle, the young women technically belonged to Gunlaug, and Gunlaug was very particular about people laying hands on his belongings without permission. Even if some foolish guard was brave enough to anger Saishan, no one with a desire to live was willing to get on the bad side of the Bright Lord. Sunny, however, was already scared enough by Saishan herself. The first time he had sent his shadow to take a look at what the handmaidens were up to when no one was watching, it had almost gotten caught. That was the first time someone managed to sense his shadow. One moment, beautiful Saishan was calmly standing with her back to the shaded corner where it was concealed, giving instructions to one of her subordinates, and in the next, she suddenly turned around and looked directly at the hiding shadow. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny shut his eyes and shifted all of his perception back. He was fairly sure that no one would be able to directly see the shadow. After all, his innate stealth enhancement was even more pronounced when it came to his silent companion. However, there were a lot of different aspects. Many awakened, for example, were able to feel when someone was looking at them. Praying that this was the case here, Sunny waited for a while before cautiously opening one eye. Luckily, this time, he didn't cause too much of a commotion. Confirming that Saishan had returned to her conversation, he hurriedly sent the shadow away and made sure to stay away from the mysterious beauty, and her handmaidens in general, ever since. The last 100 people in the castle were those who paid tribute, but didn't serve Gunlaug directly. There was no real name for this group, so Sunny simply called them tenants in his mind. There were two types of tenants. A smaller number of them were those who were able to make a decent living by providing Gunlaug's men with various services, mostly having to do with craftsmanship and entertainment. For example, there was a man who created something akin to a music lounge, another one who operated a small theater troupe, and even an entrepreneurial girl who owned a gambling den. A larger number of tenants were people like Harper, those who had entered the castle through luck and remained there by the skin of their teeth, desperately trying to earn soul shards for tribute by acting as servants and doing various menial jobs. These poor folks were at the very bottom of the social hierarchy of the castle. And on the opposite side of that hierarchy, there was the Golden Serpent, the master of the castle, Bright Lord Gunlaug himself. The man who, by Effie's description, was nearly immortal. On his 5th day in the ancient stronghold, Sonny had finally laid eyes on this loathsome tyrant. He didn't like what he saw at all. Chapter 143, Gunlaug. Despite the fact that Gunlaug's heavy presence permeated every centimeter of the castle, the Bright Lord himself was strangely elusive. He didn't show himself often, preferring to rule through his 5 proxies. Whether it was out of arrogance, paranoia, or some other reason, Sonny did not know. After the incident with Seishan, he was afraid to let his shadow walk too freely and tried to avoid going anywhere near the fearsome master of the ancient stronghold. Because of these precautions, he had not seen Gunlaug until their 5th day in the castle. As it turned out, when Golden Serpent did show up, he liked to leave an impression. Sonny and Cassie were about to receive their usual breakfast when the whole grand hall suddenly grew deathly silent. Feeling that something was wrong, they turned to the entrance, just in time to see a torrent of guards pouring inside. Sonny's heart skipped a beat. What's this? Fearing for the worst, he tried to think of the best way to escape. But luckily, the menacing soldiers of the host paid them no attention. Instead, they quickly dispersed around the hall and moved the long tables to the walls, creating a large open space in the middle. Cassie grasped Sonny's shoulder and whispered, "What is going on?" He hesitated, then answered uncertainly, "I'm not sure." Suddenly, he caught sight of Castor standing among the crowd. The handsome young man had a solemn look on his face. His gaze was turned to the dark alcove at the far end of the hall. One by one, all the sleepers turned to face the same direction. Sonny followed their example. Slowly, 5 figures stepped out of the darkness of the alcove and stood at the steps leading up to the throne. They were Gemma, Tessai, Seishan, Kido, and the last of the 5 lieutenants. When Sonny noticed him, an involuntary shudder ran through his body. The 5th lieutenant had no official duties in the Bright Castle, but everyone here feared him the most. It was a strange, pale man with a bony face and glassy, emotionless eyes. His spine was twisted, making him appear deceptively short. The hunchback was wearing simple black clothes with no adornments and holding himself with a bit of awkwardness, as though uncomfortable with all the attention. His name was Haruz, and he was Bright Lord's hidden blade and executioner. When someone needed to be disposed of, he was sent to carry out the punishment. If Gunlaug wanted everyone to know about his displeasure, there would be rivers of blood left in his wake. If not, there wouldn't be even a single drop. People would just disappear, as though they had never existed. Haruz was Gunlaug's murderous shadow. Many of the inhabitants of the castle had seen nightmares in which they awoke only to see his glassy, cold eyes staring at them from the darkness. For some, those nightmares became a reality. Haruz was willing and eager to follow any command of his master, no matter how vile. What disturbed Sonny the most, however, was that looking at Haruz was like looking at a dark mirror. Despite the fact that they were almost nothing alike, for some reason, he couldn't help but recognize traces of himself in the sadistic butcher. Or, to be precise, of a possible future version of himself. No way. I am much more pleasant on the eye. Forcing himself to look away before the hunchback felt his stare, Sonny turned his head and looked at the tall man who had finally appeared from the darkness. At least he assumed that it was a man, and not some golden demon. Bright Lord Gunlaug was clad in a strange, gilded armor that covered his tall figure from head to toe, not leaving even his eyes exposed. It seemed simultaneously solid and liquid, almost flowing over his mighty muscles and broad, powerful shoulders. In the place where his face should have been, a smooth and empty expanse of polished gold reflected the frightened faces of hundreds of sleepers back at them. Sonny saw his own reflection staring at him and suddenly realized how small and weak he was in front of this brilliant giant. His legs trembled. The pressure Gunlaug exerted on the space around him was almost palpable. All the people near Sonny were going through a similar kind of experience as him. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, drops of sweat appearing on their temples. Even the lieutenant seemed slightly uncomfortable, affected by this oppressive aura just like the rest of them. God damn it. That's not an aura, that's a mind attack. Protected by the, doubtless, trait of the puppeteer's shroud, Sonny was more resistant to such attacks than most. Gritting his teeth, he shook off the effects of Gunlaug's psychic pressure and drew in a deep breath. Then, he glanced at Cassie, concerned about her well-being. To his surprise, the blind girl was doing absolutely fine. Unlike the rest of them, she wasn't showing any signs of distress. Sunny stared at her and blinked a couple of times. The reflection. This all started when I saw my reflection in the visor of that bastard's weird armor. But Cassie is blind, so... It seemed as though Gunlaug wasn't actually attacking them. It was just an enchantment of that strange golden armor of his. Whoever looked at its mirror-like face was immediately assaulted by a crippling feeling of awe, dread, and the crushing desire to submit. What kind of a memory can practically paralyze several hundred people just from its passive effect? Sunny thought, astonished. How was this possible? Meanwhile, Gunlaug approached the empty white throne and gracefully sat down. The light falling from the numerous holes in the back wall of the alcove reflected from his armor, making it appear as though he was enveloped by a bright radiance. The golden mirror that served him as a face turned to gaze at the rows of sleepers trembling at his feet. A few moments later, a deep and insidious voice resounded from all around them, as though the castle itself was whispering into their ears, "Ah, what a nice day it is today. A perfect day for justice, don't you think, my precious wards? I've heard that there's a criminal hiding among us today. Well, am I not fair? Am I not just? Let me show you how just I am." Chapter 144, Rite of Challenge. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. Shaken by Gunlaug's serpentine voice, he was tempted to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. However, he also understood that every person in the Grand Hall currently felt the same urge. Everyone here had done something that might be considered a crime by the tyrant. He almost expected to hear people begin confessing their sins, but at that moment, a strange commotion at the doors attracted his attention. Moving with menacing determination, two guards dragged a man to the center of the hall and threw him on the floor. The man was dressed in rags and painfully lean, which betrayed his nature as a dweller of the outer settlement. However, there were ropes of powerful muscles rolling under his thin skin, and an angry, fearless look in his eyes that made the man appear proud and defiant. Throwing a contemptuous stare at the guards, he picked himself up from the floor and stood up, his back straight and his head held high. There was no ounce of fear on his face. Instead, there was dark, furious resentment. Gunlaug looked down on the brave man from his throne and slightly tilted his head. The outsider grimaced after seeing his reflection in the golden mask, but still didn't lower his head. That's pure willpower, Sunny thought, impressed by the stranger. Meanwhile, Bright Lord's voice resounded in the Grand Hall once again, "My wards. We have a guest today. This man, called Jubii, is visiting us from the outer settlement. Recently, he had been heard leveraging an accusation against one of my men. As a just and benevolent lord, I have invited Jubii here to plead his case and expose the criminal. We must get to the bottom of this matter. After all, the law is our only guiding star in this dark world." Despite being free from the psychic pressure emanated by Gunlaug's armor, Sunny still felt strangely affected by his deep, soft voice. He even got goosebumps. With or without the golden memory, Bright Lord possessed a powerful and ingratiating charisma. It was hard not to listen to him. But the man called Jubii just smirked. "That's right. I'm here to accuse one of your thugs, Gunlaug. Let's see how you'll get out of this one, bastard." With that, he raised one hand and pointed a finger at the group of hunters watching the proceeding from their usual corner of the Grand Hall. "That man right there, one of your so-called pathfinders, is guilty of murder. He had killed an innocent kid in the most repugnant of ways. I've been watching you and your minions commit all sorts of vile crimes over these years, but enough is enough. Today, I'll see him answer with his life for what he did." A wave of shocked whispers ran through the crowd. Accusing a pathfinder was not something a sane person would ever do. Due to their venerated status, these men were nearly untouchable. And yet, Jubii seemed unrelenting. Gunlaug spoke, "Is that so?" "That is a heavy accusation, Jubii. Please, tell us more." The man from the outer settlement gritted his teeth. "That scum and his people lured a naive kid into their party by promising him all kinds of rewards and riches. They told him that he is going to become one of them and come to live in your damn castle. But in reality, they just fed him to the monsters as bait." He spat on the floor. "You dare to call yourself hunters, you damn cowards. Don't you have any shame? A heavy silence settled in the grand hall. People were now staring at the group of hunters with dark expressions on their faces. The inhabitants of the castle were used to pretending to be blind to all kinds of wicked deeds, but all those deeds were committed by humans against other humans. What they couldn't forgive was a human being betraying another of their kind to the nightmare creatures. In the dark city, this was tantamount to sacrilege. Gunlaug turned his head to face the hunters, who shivered under his gaze. Is this true? The oldest of the group, the Pathfinder, glanced darkly at Jubii and scowled. There must be some kind of a misunderstanding, my lord. The boy in question was a highly valued member of my party. We all had high hopes for his future. His death saddened all of us a great deal. His voice was steady and calm. Perhaps even a little too calm. Jubii snarled, lies. I happened to be hunting on the day myself and saw everything with my own 2 eyes. I know what you did, bastard. Gunlaug turned to face the crows and sighed. After some time had passed, he solemnly said, what an unfortunate situation. It seems that it is your word against his, Jubii. What to do, what to do? I trust my brave men wholeheartedly, of course. Who would be so ungrateful as to distrust these heroes when they're the ones keeping you all alive? Surely, there's no one that vile and wicked among you, my precious wards. Sunny held his breath, feeling singled out by the insidious voice. The chilling threat hidden behind these words was not very subtle. Gunlaug was silent for a few moments, battering the crowd with his oppressive psychic aura. Then, he turned away, letting the people breathe, and said, but it would be unbecoming of me to play favorites in such a grave matter. And this matter, oh, it is grave indeed. What a dilemma. How do we uphold justice, my wards? In the ensuing silence, Gemma, the leader of both hunters and pathfinders, suddenly spoke, my lord, if I may speak. Isn't there a law that suits this situation perfectly? It has existed for as long as humans lived in this ancient castle. I'm talking, of course, about the right of challenge. He glanced at Jubii and smiled. If this brave hunter has any shadow of doubt about his accusation, he should step down. If not, he can challenge the criminal and prove it with blood. Of course, the real culprit here is me. As the person responsible for these men, any crime they commit in their roles as hunters is my fault. Gemma's charismatic smile was wide and friendly. So how about, Jubii? Will you step down? Or do you want to challenge me? The hunter from the outer settlement glared at him for a while, his eyes burning with fury and contempt. Finally, he spat, do you think I'm afraid of you, lapdog? Sure, why not? I challenge you.